everyone. Welcome all to the SnailTrail4x4 Podcast. If you like going off-roading in Toyotas, wrenching on Toyotas, camping in Toyotas, and maybe even poking a little bit of fun at Toyotas, and of course, hearing about how many batteries you can put in a Toyota, then this is the podcast for you. That's right, ladies and germs. Welcome to episode 238 of the SnailTrail4x4 Podcast. And I have the one and only Mr. Paper Straw Jimmy Jet himself. Mr. Straw, how are you?
I'm doing well. I don't have a paper straw.
What'd you do with it?
I threw it away.
Oh, you did?
I'm using one of the
Sherpa straws?
The Sherpa straws.
Perfect.
I grabbed it out of your center console.
Yeah. That was pretty funny. We went to get some lunch here before recording, and we could walk out of the restaurant, and you're like, did they give me a paper straw? And so we get in the car, and you open it up, and it's a paper straw.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't drink my drink until I got back here and grabbed the straw out of your truck. One
of the guilt-free, biodegradable, compostable straws from Sherpa.
Yes, thank you so much, Sherpa.
Yep. It's like he should live in Los Angeles.
I know. It's like he's a California boy, but doesn't live in California.
Right. It's okay. We don't want him to live in California. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to claim him as a Californian. He can keep his Floridian status.
Yes, please. You and Florida Frank. Yeah. I wonder if they've met yet.
They probably go out to bars all the time and make fun of us.
Probably.
So
they probably are just sitting there. They probably get together to listen to the episodes.
Oh, that'd be funny.
And have some drinks in the meantime.
That's so cute. You two are adorable.
Bash us.
Oh, man. So here we are on a Monday. We've got some fun topics for you guys today. But before we get into them, this is October 18th when you're listening to this episode. I believe so. I could be wrong. But that means we only have about 2 more weeks.
Yeah.
Before the gift box tier closes.
Yeah. In 2 weeks, the gift box tier will be closed.
That's right. October 30th. So one more day.
It'll be the first in 2 weeks.
Gotcha. So there we go. 2 more weeks to get in for April's gift box.
Tyler's box,
which we've already given away 2 of the items in there. So a knife and a really cool sheath made for him, custom made for it by Bandit Concealment. You can check out all the stuff that he has. He has some really cool wallets as well.
Oh, yeah?
He makes like a wallet with a clasp on the back of it to put a hidden knife. So that if someone tries to take your wallet, you can grab the knife out as they take the wallet and
shank them.
Yeah, shank them. So anyways, he's got a bunch of really cool stuff. Check it out at Bandit Concealment on Instagram, all one word.
Cool.
So that's 2 of the items, I guess, coming in April's gift box. The rest of it's going to be a secret, super secret. And
we don't even know what it is yet.
True. We're really good at keeping secrets. So that's going to be coming up. This month's giveaway is 2 of the October gift boxes. And those should all be in and ready to go hopefully that first week of November. So you guys should see them on your doorsteps, hopefully the second week of November. If you're in on that gift box tier since last April is when last time it was open, I believe.
And Ben, hopefully by the time you're listening to this, you have the DeltaVS tool bag.
Nice.
That I still need to deliver to you.
Look at you. You're almost as bad a procrastinator as Ben.
Why was Ben a bad procrastinator?
I don't know, because I said so.
Okay. Yeah. Dang you, Ben.
Oh, man. That's the I guess giveaway updates.
Yep.
For patron stuff. The studio is coming along nicely. We are getting more and more parts thanks to Kermit's rear end going bad.
Right. And nice donations from our listeners. Thank you so much for all that.
Yep. If you guys wanted to donate any broken parts, let us know. Send them on over here. We'll get you a mailing address to ship them out to. So far, we have an axle shaft over there. I meant to ask you, do you know what the story is behind that?
Is that the one Hustle Nuts gave us?
Yeah.
No.
Oh.
I don't have a story behind it either. It's a big axle, though. I think it's like a 14 bolt.
It's an 8-lug pattern. That's why I was asking what the story is behind it, because I know Hessman doesn't have any 8-lug axles.
He told me something that I don't know enough. We'll have to either hear it from him or get him on the podcast to share that story or something.
Yeah, because we need stories for all the broken parts that we have coming in here.
Are we gonna write like little?
I think it'd be fun to put little
cue cards.
Yes. Yeah.
This axle shaft is from John Doe, and John Doe was trying to 3-wheel it up Slick Rock.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we've got that. We have a first gen Toyota pickup grill that's on loan. Loan.
We'll go with that.
Yeah. We have an 8-inch ring and pinion. We have original style 8-inch ARB. We've got a mile marker hub. We have, I believe, an 8 1/4 third carrier, and a ring gear on there.
Yep.
And the pinion as well. I think the pinion's in that box. We have a crumpled up drive shaft.
Yes, we do.
Which was crumpled up in little sluice by a listener. Let's see. We have the snail trail sign.
Yep.
The cutout of the one that I got to weld together that's up in the shop right now.
Too bad we don't have the drops for like the A and the R.
Oh, yeah.
And the A. Because if we could put that like on a piece of wood and then or something for like, and then put the center pieces back in.
That'd be neat.
Yeah. I have 2 axle shafts. Rear axle shafts at my house that I was going to bring by.
Oh, yeah?
One of them has my twisted splines.
Oh, yeah. All that power that Bobcat has.
Exactly. All that force. And one of them is so rusty, I would never use it again.
Gotcha. I have a few of those too.
It's not broken, but I figured, bring it over anyway.
Would an acetone bath clear all that up?
Maybe.
I hear somebody might have some acetone.
Maybe.
That we know.
Not me, but
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. He saw it, if it's the same person I'm thinking of. He saw it and he's like, yeah, I probably wouldn't worry about it. They're cheap though. They're pretty cheap, those axles.
Yeah.
So.
I agree. I don't know. I have a couple rust out ones too, and I've always been like, I wonder how much work it would take to just clean these up real quick.
Yeah.
So
I have a rusty 1985 mini truck housing that I might use, but might not, because I don't know how much time and effort I want to put into cleaning it.
Gotcha.
But it's not for sale, ladies and gentlemen.
You could probably get like a good $1,000 out of a rusty mini truck axle.
I bet. What's crazy is I used to think that to buy a full complete 85 or like Toyota mini truck axle for $500 complete hub to hub was a good deal. And now they're selling like housings for $500.
Yep. It's crazy.
Chris Maines, I'm getting old.
I know, right? Man, back in my day, axle housings were $200.
People paid you to take their Toyota mini truck axles away.
Right. Oh, man. Cool. And then, of course, we have the Shalamp.
Yes.
We can't forget about mentioning that one.
The Shalamp. Thank you very much, Shalurpa.
So, cool. And then I'm building the 4Runner seats.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll have those instead of these office chairs I'm sitting in right now.
Thanks, Mr. Toronto.
Yep, he donated some leaf springs for that project because we're going to make kind of like rocking chairs, like high top rocking chairs out of the leaf springs.
Oh, is that you're going to turn them that way?
I think so, yeah. I think that's what I'm thinking about doing. I just don't know how much space that'll take up. Like if you put up the leaf springs, I don't know if we have space right here to create a rock. I might be able to put one like
if
right
you're
here
going to arc, so you're going to sit on the arc section.
Yeah.
I think people are just going to fall over backwards. You're going to have to put like a wheelie bar or something back there.
Okay. Could we take convert an anti-wrap bar into that?
Maybe. It'd be interesting is if you went from eyelet to eyelet on the ground, so it curved up, and then you attached another set of springs that curved down to that curved up section, and you attached them in the middle so that they could like
double spring bounce,
and it would still be able to lean back.
It's like a quarter elliptical, but yeah, opposite direction.
Kind of. It's like a full elliptical.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
Fun. That would be interesting. Yeah.
I wonder if anybody else around here has more leaf springs.
I wonder.
I've got them coming out my ears.
I know a few people with a lot of leaf springs laying around. Cool, man. So yeah, we're working on building out the studio after collecting a bunch of parts. We still have some space to put more parts. So if people wanted to send in something with a little write-up about the story of why that part is the way it is now, let us know, and we'll get you a shipping address, and you can send them on in and have them be a part of the recording studio here at SnailTrail4x4.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yep. Cool, man. So let's see. I think that about does it.
Yeah, we do have a lot of reviews coming in. Thank you, everybody, for leaving us reviews. I think we're coming up quick. We're probably halfway or just past halfway on getting to that 350 mark.
We're at 326.
Oh, just past halfway. Awesome. And we will cover reviews in Thursday's episode.
Perfect.
Yeah, but make sure to leave them if you haven't, because when we get to 500...
We're giving away a
winch.
Yay! And once we give away a winch, I can get a shop press. Because right now the winch is taking up that space.
Do you want me to store it for you? Or do you want to bring it over here and store it, and then you can get yourself a shop press?
I don't know if we have enough space here.
Yeah. Well,
you want to put it with your collection of winches?
Yeah. I moved all my snail armor panels into my garage.
Okay.
So I have a whole shelf that's open right now. I'm like looking at it like, how do I store things up there? What do I need to store up there? That's what I've been looking at. So, I mean, if you need me to throw a winch on there.
Maybe.
Okay.
We'll see.
I'll go get the secretary.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, that does it. You ready to get into today's topic of discussions?
I'm ready for you to talk and me to go, oh, really?
That's boring.
Oh, really?
Yes, it is. All right. Grab your favorite drinks with your favorite compostable straws, and we'll be right on back with today's campfire discussion. Welcome back, ladies and gentleladies. Today's Truck Talk is brought to you by the assistant, because she loves Truck Talk. Isn't that right, Jimmy?
No.
No?
No.
Why doesn't? What does she usually do when Truck Talk happens?
She walks away.
Rolls her eyes.
Goes, oh, it's more Truck Talks.
Oh, I'm going to go find something to do for the next 10 hours.
No, I don't know. I think she just tired of it. But what's funny is whenever I'm with her and her friends, she always talks about teaching things. And almost all of her friends are teachers. That's like what their profession is.
Okay.
And so it's like when I get into that situation, there's nobody else that isn't a teacher.
Yeah.
So everybody's involved in that conversation. But usually when we go out camping or go hiking or, whatever, and I fall into Truck Talk, like she can go talk to somebody else. Like if, you and your wife and me and my wife go out wheeling and we start falling into Truck Talk, they'll
start talking.
They'll start talking about something else, and so I find myself in the situation. I have sympathy for her because I understand when you're in a group of situations, and somebody's there, the whole group's talking about something that you're not interested in. But at least when she's with us, she has somebody else to go talk to. Where when I'm with her friends, I have nobody. I just sit there and drink.
Yeah. Well, at least you have a good option there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because usually we're hanging out at camping or doing something else, and there has been a point when it's like halfway through the night or whatever, and I just hand her my keys. I'm like, you've been talking the entire time. You haven't been drinking. I've been drinking and not talking. So you're driving home.
Yeah. Have you ever just kind of interrupted the discussion and been like, so who here has a stage 2 cam in their engine? See what people say.
Yeah. No.
Okay. What's everyone's differentials geared at?
Yeah,
go. You go.
Yeah. No. They wouldn't know.
Everyone would kind of look at you like, the fuck is Jimmy talking about?
Yeah. I'd get one of those.
Give him more wine. We're going to go back to talking about
I'd get one of those like backhand slaps to my chest from the assistant.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't truck talk.
Yeah.
I'm finally talking with my friends.
Yeah. Well, guess what? We get to talk about truck talk.
I know. I'm making her sound like a bad person. But no.
Yeah.
And thank you, Tyler, for allowing us to talk truck talk.
Yay.
Except we're not really talking truck today.
Kind of. It's talking about things you can do to your trucks.
Yeah.
So, and I think that it's things that a lot of people want to do. And I think that there's a lot of different ways to do it. And so it's just kind of trying to figure out which way you want to go with.
Yes.
So we're going to be talking about today is dual batteries and battery setups for your off-road vehicle.
Yeah.
So, I think that there's a ton of information out there on dual battery setups. There's a lot of plug and play kits available for dual batteries. You can go anywhere from just saying, hey, I want to build my own battery mount. I want to run my own wires. I want to buy all my own fuses, do all my own end connectors. I want to do everything myself and set it all up the way I want to set it up. Or there's lots of kits out there, especially if you have a newer vehicle, like a JK or a JL or a Gladiator or a 5th gen 4Runner, a 3rd gen Tacoma, even LX 470s. There's a lot of newer vehicles out there. Chevy Colorado's, I'm sure, has some that all have just kind of like bolt-on things that are the battery trays already made for you. Mm-hmm. The wiring is already done for you. They have locations already picked out in your engine bay for you where to put everything. They have step-by-step instructions on exactly where to run your wiring. So I think that you can go from anywhere from, mild install to completely custom wild install.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, like, one of the things I'm interested in, I'm not sure how far in the weeds we're going to get with it, is like, what are some of these other systems out there? Like, I don't know, even if this company does it, it just makes me think of them, is Red Arc. Like, Red Arc makes, I believe, all these sort of like electrical setups. I'm not even quite sure what they exactly do, but it's like, you could connect with these systems and tie it into dual batteries or use them to regulate dual batteries, or know when one battery needs to turn off and another one needs to turn on, or when to convert power from back and forth, and and all these. Or you can go completely DIY and just kind of wire them in series, or is it it's in series,
parallel.
right? Oh, wire in parallel.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a whole, there's a lot of different ways to kind of go about it.
Yeah. When you get down to it, the BMS, the battery management system, is a key crucial part of any dual battery setup. And that's the part that's like, you can go into a lot of different options for a BMS, from like what you said, just a simple, super simple, wire up your batteries in parallel and you're good, you're done, to isolating different batteries, to wiring up multiple batteries if you want to run a 400 amp hour battery setup in a trailer kind of thing. And so, there's a lot of different stuff. And then there's different styles of battery management systems depending on how you want to set up your batteries and how much power you want to have for your adventures on your vehicle. And so, we'll get into it a little bit, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I think, and we don't have to answer it right now, but one of the things I'm curious about is, would you do a dual battery again, or would you do something else? And that's, we can talk about that at the end.
Okay. Because the big thing is, I don't know a lot of the products, right? I like to DIY and build stuff myself. So that I know exactly how it's made. And B, I know exactly how to maintain it if anything happens to it in the future. So I'm not going to know a lot of brands that make battery management systems. I'm not going to know and be able to say, hey, go to Red Arc or go to Blue Sea Systems for this particular device, or go to this. I just know what types of devices you need to accomplish making a safe battery setup.
Okay.
So, yeah, dual batteries. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right.
That was a long intro to get to the main topic.
Yeah. So essentially, what is a dual battery setup?
It's 2 batteries.
Okay. That's good. It's 2 batteries. Are they connected together, or are they not connected, or are we talking about 2 AA batteries? What are we talking about here?
Well, I mean, when I hear dual batteries, I assume that it's 2 automotive car batteries, whether it's lead acids or AGMs or whatever. It's 2 automotive car batteries, or truck batteries, but that are wired together one way or another so that you can run more things on your vehicle without putting the strain onto one battery.
Okay. That's a good thing. When I think of dual batteries, I think of, you essentially want to have 2 batteries because you have 2 intended purposes for batteries in a vehicle. One reason why you put batteries in a vehicle, A, is to run your 12-volt system. And typically your 12-volt system in a vehicle encompasses the electronics in your dashboard. It encompasses pretty much all the electronics in your vehicle for the most part. But the reason why you want a battery instead of just running everything straight off your alternator is because the alternator has power surges associated with the increase and decrease of the revs of your engine.
Okay.
And so by having these power surges, you can blow out your electrical circuitry in your vehicle. So having a car battery in there helps to even out all the electrical surges. A really simple way of thinking of a car battery is just a big way to store incoming power so that you can use it at a later time. Right? Sure. And so by doing that, it makes your 12-volt system very stable in your vehicle. So you may want to have a battery to run your 12-volt system. You may also want a battery to run other things that you don't necessarily want connected to your 12-volt system of your vehicle. So you're creating kind of a separate 12-volt system on your vehicle. Is one way to think about it. So, and the big reason why a lot of people like to isolate those is for their starter. Because if you are running a bunch of accessories on your vehicle, maybe lights, maybe you're running your stereo while you're making dinner and your vehicle's not on kind of thing out at camp or something, any draw you have on your 12-volt system is going to drain the same battery that your vehicle uses to run the starter to get your engine going. So being able to isolate 12-volt systems is kind of a nice thing to do when you're trying to live out of your vehicle from time to time.
Sure. I understand that. So in theory, you're not worrying about if you're going to be able to start your vehicle the next day by you running a light and running a fridge and a microwave and a blender and whatever else you're going to run. If you're having a separate battery setup or a second battery setup.
Yep.
That way you're kind of isolating all of your air quote accessories onto one battery, and your engine and vehicle is on one battery.
Exactly. So that's kind of the point of dual batteries, right? Is to isolate so that you have one vehicle or one battery kind of always dedicated to making sure it's good and full enough to restart your vehicle.
Right.
The other batteries then get used for house stuff. And so that's why they call them house batteries versus starter batteries.
Oh, I've never heard that term.
Oh yeah, it's very extremely used, extremely common, very used in the boating world, the marine world.
Okay.
And RV world.
Sure.
And so RVs, trailers, campers, a lot of them will have a house battery that is separate from whatever the important infrastructure battery would be, kind of thing. So when we're off-roading, you have your starter battery and your house battery. Those don't necessarily need to be connected, but the problem becomes, how do you recharge them as you use them?
Well, your car battery, your starter battery is always going to recharge whenever you're running the vehicle.
In theory, yes.
If your alternator is working.
Exactly.
But if you don't have any way to charge the house battery, then it's just continuously draining. And then eventually it'll get to a point where it won't be able to be recharged. Okay. So what do you do for that? Yeah, I would assume that you could either have a switch that connects the two batteries, or have a switch that you can connect both batteries to the starter or to the alternator.
To the alternator, yep. So there's a few different ways, with the proliferation of solar panels, you can essentially just never connect the two.
Sure.
And have a solar charging setup for one of your batteries, which is essentially what Jackery does, or what the Wagon Tech lithium cube is. So any of those kind of portable lithium ion batteries, if you take those on your adventures, you're running a dual battery setup. You're just not ever connecting the two.
Yeah, I didn't put that together until like 5 minutes ago when you were talking. And I was like, because I was like, I've never ran a dual battery. I'm like, well, I kind of have dual batteries now, I guess. I never thought about it.
Yep.
Just now I either charge it at home, one battery at home on the wall, because I don't have solar panels for it yet. Or I'm not using dual batteries and I'm just running it off of my truck. So that's kind of funny. I never thought of it.
Yeah. So technically, whenever I go out, I'm running a triple battery setup.
Yes, you are.
I have my Jackery and then my 2 batteries on Kermit. So anyways, so you can run a dual battery setup without ever connecting the batteries. You just need to have a way to recharge it, right? So what a lot of people do with dual battery setups in vehicles is they find a way to connect them together when you want them connected together, and isolate them when you want them isolated. And that decision point on whether or not you want them connected or not is the alternator running.
Yeah.
And so if the alternator is running, then you typically want your batteries connected together so that everything is recharging. If the alternator is not running, then you want them disconnected or isolated from each other so that you can use the house battery for all of your accessories. You can draw it down as far as you want to draw it, but you're not risking the starter battery, so that you can always restart your vehicle, get the alternator running, and recharge your house battery.
Nice. Okay.
So there's different ways to do that. One way is just kind of like you already mentioned it, is just to put them on a switch. The problem with wiring them together on a switch is that, say your starter battery is at 14.2 volts, and you wear your house battery down to 11 volts.
Okay.
10.5 to 11. You really wear the hell out of it, and you've really drained everything out of it that you can. There's a massive voltage difference between those. So once you hook them up with a switch, you have a huge amperage, a big power draw surge going from the full battery to the dead battery. Mm-hmm. And when you have a really big discrepancy in voltage like that, there's a lot of power going through that, and there's a lot of heat. There's a lot of resistance. And if your wiring is not built up good enough, or you don't have things fused properly, you could melt wiring and catch things on fire.
Which is bad for starting your vehicle.
Which is very bad for getting alternator running later. Exactly. So, it's so you can do it with a switch. You just have to be very, very careful and very conscious of how far you're draining your house battery before you connect those two batteries back together.
Okay.
So, that's the first thing. The second issue with doing those switches is if your battery is really low, the house battery, and you connect it to your starter battery, it's now sending a ton of electrons out of the starter battery. And if that exceeds what the battery is rated for, the amperage draw for that battery, you can damage the battery internally. And then now your starter battery becomes dead, kind of like your house battery.
Right.
So, I'm not a fan of ever using a switch method, just because you have to pay too much attention. It's not worry-free. You have to pay way too much attention as to when those get connected and how much power is going through, to control the amperage draw, so you're not killing your starter battery and you're not catching things on fire. So another way to do it is to have essentially, I don't want to say capacitors in the way, but you could kind of set up a capacitor circuit so that you have capacitors transferring the energy rather than the battery. Mm-hmm. And so that just helps the load on the battery. The battery isn't having to supply the entire amperage load of the starter battery to the house battery if you have other capacitors in the way in the middle of that connection as well. The capacitors kind of provided the load, and then the starter battery, is refilling those capacitors.
Got it.
Charging the capacitors. So that would help save your starter battery from being killed, but that doesn't necessarily help the high pull, the load of the house battery and catching things on fire. So what a lot of people like to do is there's different amperage rated connectors. I don't know what exactly the correct term would be for them, but what they are is they set up a kind of a logic switch, a logic gate in them that states if the voltage of your battery, the voltage of the incoming charge is greater than 13.5, whatever it would be, whatever it's set to, then open up the circuit. I guess technically close the circuit so everything's connected, and it allows power to go in between it and off to the other batteries. So it's kind of like a switch in a way that
it's a regulator.
Kind of, yeah. It's a logic switch that takes care of recharging your batteries for you. You don't have to manually flip a switch. It's just there in between your two batteries. Mm-hmm. And so when your alternator is on, because your alternator, when it's on, it should be pushing 14 volts. If it's not on, then you just have the 12 volt battery with its charge, which should be anywhere from 12.2 to 12.8 volts. So if the logic gate kind of in between the two batteries is 13.5, it will never connect your two batteries unless the alternator is on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So that's kind of the key component of a lot of quote unquote dual battery systems, and finding that part and ways to have that part operate differently. So you can have, I've heard of parts that will be Bluetooth controlled. So it has almost like a Bluetooth switch to it where you can manually override and make it connect your two batteries together from your phone kind of thing. So a lot of them will be, you can have analog switches on it. You can have wireless switches to your phone and run off an app. You can set up switches, different spots around your vehicle if you really wanted to manually connect those together. The other key component to dual battery setups is 100% isolation, so that you know for safety reasons that the batteries are disconnected, rather than relying on this logic switch that may misbehave and you're not sure.
Okay. What do you mean by 100% isolation?
It just means that the batteries are for sure not connected together. Okay. Other than physically disconnecting the wires from them.
Got it.
And essentially it's the same style of battery on off switch that you'll see in like off-road buggies, like Ultra 4 cars run them all the time.
Yes.
To turn off, disconnect their battery, their 12 volt systems. So a 100% confident, I guess, 100% sure that you have battery isolation is another component that you can think about building into your dual battery setup. But really the important part is that the logic gate. That way you don't have to remember to connect and disconnect your batteries when you want to. And then those logic gates, like I said, there's a lot of different designs out there, a lot of different companies that make them. And so you can just start looking into them and figure out what are the different functions of them for connecting and disconnecting your batteries, either automatically, manually, however you want to do it. So other than that, you also have fuses or circuit breakers. So whenever you connect two batteries together, in order to help keep that drastic difference in voltage from catching things on fire, you can use fuses and circuit breakers. So typically, you just have to pay attention to what size wire you're using, what gauge wire, because all of the fuses that you ever do, never ever set up fuses for what you're going to be drawing, what your power usage is. You set up fuses for what gauge wire you're using.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And then hopefully you're making sure that the gauge wire you're using is set up for whatever purpose whatever your power draw is going to be.
Yeah. So can we talk about that for a quick second?
Okay.
Because when I was working on the Blue Seas setup in Charlotte, I said, hey, it comes with a 100 amp breaker. Mm-hmm. So what wires should I be using?
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so how does one figure out, I guess, any of those questions? Like, how do you like, if you're installing a dual battery, how do you know what wires you're going to need? How do you know what size gauge it needs to be? Then how do you decide what fuses you're going to be running? How do you figure all that kind of stuff out because I had a cheat. Right. My cheat said I have a 100 amp breaker.
Yeah. So
then I was able to go onto Google and go, what size wire do I need for a 100 amp breaker?
Yep.
And then Google says, here you go, dummy. So if you don't have something like that, if you're going to be setting something up like this, how do you figure that out? How do you determine where to start? Great
question, because that's really what all electronics come down to, or at least building circuits, right? Building wiring and building electronics. So any electronic component sold in the United States is required to have something on it, some kind of sticker, something on it that tells you what that component is drawing on power. And it'll usually tell you in amperes. So it'll tell you what voltage that component should be working on, running off of. So either 12 volt or 120 volt or 220 volt. Mm-hmm. And then it'll say how many amperages it pulls.
Okay.
So that when you take those two given informations, that should be on any electrical component in the United States.
Right.
I don't know how the rest of the world is set up, but in the United States, every single electrical component has to have that on there. You take those two things and that will give you what wattage you're running. So your voltage times your amperes equals your wattage. And so say you have a 12 volt item, say you have an LED light bar that pulls 10 amps.
Sure.
It's running on a 12 volt system, 12 volts at 10 amps. So 12 times 10 is
120.
120. Woo! Yay. So that light bar is going to pull 120 watts.
Okay.
Now that you have those three pieces of information, you can start building your electrical wiring. So then you need to know it pulls 120 watts or 10 amps at 12 volts. So now you can say, okay, since this pulls, we know how much this is going to pull when it's on. What gauge wiring do we need to know? That's what Google's there for. So I actually, at one point, I don't know if I still have it. If I do, it's buried away in my photo gallery. But I had screenshotted. You can type into Google and just put in amperes for gauges, or what gauge amps. Sorry.
What gauge wire for amps.
Exactly. And you go to the image search on it and it'll have all these different diagrams.
Okay.
I'm set up for it. So you can look at that and say, okay, we're setting up a 10 amp power draw. So the wiring for that needs to be whatever gauge wiring it says.
Let's see what it says.
I'm going to guess and say 16 gauge, but we'll see.
For a maximum of 10 amps, you will need 16 gauge wire.
Hey, there we go. Look at me go. Lucky guess. So yeah, the other part of that equation would be how long of a run of wire you're going to be doing. The longer the wiring is, the thicker the gauge needs to be, because as electricity flows through wiring, there's resistance there. And so you lose power due to resistance in wire. The longer the wire is, the more resistance over length you're going to end up. So the more your power loss is going to be.
Okay.
So, you have, I don't know what the distance cutoff would be for a 10 amp wiring, but say you have 16 gauge is good for 10 amps up to 10 feet.
Okay.
And then it will say, if you want to run 10 amps at 20 feet, up to 20 feet, you need a 14 gauge wire. If you want to run 10 amps up to 50 feet, you really need like a 10 gauge wire or something like that. So there's also different distances, lengths of your wiring that you need to pay attention to as well when you're setting up wiring and looking at what gauge wiring you need to have for your power draw and everything.
Here's a question that you might not know the answer to.
Okay.
Why do gauges why does the thickness of the wire get bigger, but the gauge gets smaller?
I still don't know why that system was set up that way, why it has an inverse relationship.
So annoying.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know the history of gauges and why, who gauge was and why he decided it needed to be an inverse relationship when he set it up. But yeah, super annoying. So, so that's the big thing, right? Is you have to know what your power draw is going to be for that item and set up your wiring to be the correct size for safety. And then you set up your fuses according to the wiring. So if you're wiring, say your 10 foot of 16 gauge wiring is good for 10 amps. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure that you set your fuses for 12 to 15 amps, whatever the next step in fuses you have available. So you do not want to set up a 10 amp wiring with a 20 amp fuse.
But why wouldn't you set up a 10 amp wiring with a 10 amp fuse?
Because if your light bar pulls 10 amps, then you're going to trigger the fuse right when you turn on the light bar. So the goal is to make it just over. And I think if you go into like mil spec or anything like government related, they would just say, just build your wiring for 20 amps instead of 10 amps kind of thing. But in vehicles, if you're just pulling such low amounts of power, fusing for 15 amps on a 10 amp wiring is usually pretty safe, because the whole point of fusing is to stop a short from shorting out your circuitry and then catching something on fire. Right.
So that was kind of going to be one of my next questions, sort of leading up with that. But I think you pretty much answered it. So if I'm running a 10 amp, if I'm running the 16 gauge wire for my 10 amps for the 120 watts for the light bar, and I'm running a 12 or 15 amp fuse, why wouldn't I just use a 12 or 15 amp rated wire?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can definitely do that.
If that wire is only rated up to 10 and there's a spike and it goes above that and breaks the fuse, I mean, I get it. It's like now it's broken and it's not conducting electricity and it's not getting hot, but it did get hot enough to do that. So couldn't the circuit or the connecting point prior to the fuse be hot and bothered because it was more amperage than the wire was able to transmit?
Absolutely. That's why whenever you fuse something, you want to fuse it as close to your battery as possible, so that if something happens between the battery and the fuse, you have less risk of doing that, right? Because if something happens between the battery and the fuse, there's nothing to stop it at that point. The battery is going to fully discharge itself through whatever that break in the wire is going to be. So by fusing as close to the battery as humanly possible, you help eliminate or greatly reduce the risk of that happening, what you're saying. So the other thing that you kind of brought up is, if you are running your circuit, your power draw for that circuit is only going to be 10 amps. Why not just set it up with 1 gauge wiring?
Yeah,
so that you never have to worry about overdoing the wiring kind of thing. And the simplest answer for that is just cost and ease of routing the wiring.
Yeah, sure.
You can absolutely run a 10 amp circuit on 1 gauge wiring if you really want to. It's just going to be really difficult to route that wiring, and it's going to be a lot more expensive to buy that wiring in the first place.
Okay. But you can't go the other way. You can't run 100 amp on a 16 gauge wire.
No. Yeah,
it'll just burn. Right, it'll melt the wire.
Yep. And so, you always want to build for your power draw, build the circuit for the power draw, and you always want to fuse according to what you built. And so when you are connecting batteries together, that's where we were at with all this.
Okay. Yeah.
When you're connecting batteries together, you got to remember that, when you start thinking about power draws, how much power is really going to be transferred if you take a 14 volt battery and connect it to a 10.5 volt battery that's dead, right? A 10.5 volt battery may be damaged beyond repair at that time, and you may just not be able to hook them together safely. But if you need to, and there's a huge spike in power, you need to be doing that with heavy gauge, thick cables, so that, your power draw could be 100, 150, 200 amps at that point, connecting those two batteries together. whatever that the starter battery is rated for its amperage output is really kind of what is going to be the draw connecting those two batteries together. So having thick gauge wiring between the two batteries, as short of runs as possible, and a circuit breaker in there. And I go with circuit breakers because that's more likely to happen between a starter and a house battery, where they get so disevenly discharged that there's a lot of times when you're connecting them together, when they do get connected back together, when your alternator turns on, you're going to have a spike in power draw from the starter battery to the house battery. So if you have fuses in there, there may be times when you're going to have to go in and replace that fuse. So which means you got to carry spare fuses. But in order to have anything that's useful, you really got to be carrying like 150 amp fuses, which are big fuses, and they're expensive, they're costly. So I always recommend to set up a circuit breaker between your batteries rather than a fuse. And what's the difference is a circuit breaker, if it pops, it just disconnects the two batteries from each other, right? Because it exceeded the amperage draw that the circuit breaker is rated for. And all you have to do is push it back into place and reconnect the circuits. Now, if you're connecting two batteries together and you pop a circuit breaker, chances are when you reconnect that circuit breaker, it's just going to pop again. Because you have too much of a uneven discharge. That's what I'm looking for.
That's when you pull out the jumper cables.
And that's when you pull out the jumper cables. Yes. No, that's when you pull out a battery charger to properly recharge your house battery to get it closer to the voltage of your starter battery. And then you can reconnect them together so that you're not having to risk shorting out something or melting wiring in order to reconnect your batteries and get them charging like normal again.
Got it.
So,
so then do you have, since the, in this scenario, it's your starter battery is charging off your alternator.
Correct.
And then you have this house battery charging off of your starter battery.
Correct.
And then you have the circuit breaker in the middle.
Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So there's no way for the alternator to charge the, in this scenario, there's no way to have the alternator charge the house battery.
In this scenario, no, you would need to have some thick gauge, like jumper cables, a 0 or 0.1 gauge wiring to connect from your alternator's positive output to your house battery.
Right.
And I don't recommend doing that either, because alternators, especially in newer vehicles, are looking at running 160 amps or so. 160, I mean, my dad has a 300 amp alternator in his truck.
Right.
So, I mean, if you take that alternator and now connect it to your house battery, there's a good chance that you could burn up your alternator, having it produce a spike of power that high for as long as it takes to recharge your house battery. Alternators, even though they're rated at 160, 150, 200, 300, whatever amperage their rating is, it's not good for alternators to constantly run at that rating. You will burn them up. So ideally, you want to have the normal draw on your alternator to be as low as possible, which is why having more batteries in your vehicle helps to elongate the life of your alternator. So what I do for that situation, because I don't want to discharge my house battery or discharge my starter battery to my house battery really quick all at once and damage one or the other or the alternator.
Okay.
I carry around also a jump box with me. And so by hooking up the jump box to the house battery, I can recharge the house battery over the course of 20, 30 minutes to get it closer to my starter battery. And that's if I know that I really discharged my house battery quite a ways, which I don't really do too much anymore because I run the fridge on my Jackery now.
Yeah.
So
I was going to ask that later.
Yeah.
I'm like, do you really use your house battery that much in Kermit that much?
Pretty much the house battery in Kermit is just set up for my ham radio stuff. So I leave my radios running whenever I get to camp and have the truck off, or whenever I stop somewhere.
Yeah.
I leave the ham radios running. So my APRS typically continues to run, and my my other radio, my main communication radio, continues to run. And I usually leave my phone plugged in charging. So there is a draw on the house battery, but I don't leave all my radios and stuff running overnight. Once I go to bed, I shut everything off. And since my fridge isn't connected to that anymore, there's no draw on the system overnight time while I'm sleeping. So I really don't discharge my house battery as much as I used to, for sure.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I think you kind of alluded to it, but can you tell us how your system is connected? Because, well, one, yours is slightly different because your batteries are where the spare tire should be in the very far back of your vehicle.
Yep.
So can you tell us what you had to do for that, and then run us through kind of how you set it up? But it sounds like pretty similar to what you kind of already told us about.
Yep. Essentially what I did was I took the key components, right? The logic gate isolator that isolates the two batteries, but then reconnects them when there's 14 volts applied from the alternator. That I just got one off Amazon. It was $100, something like that. And it's super simple. I made sure to get the one that set and disconnected according to the voltages that I wanted. And it's pretty simple. It has an inlet post and an outlet post. So you have your starter battery post and your house battery post, and then you just run thick gauge wiring between them.
Okay.
So, and then between the starter battery and that item, the isolator, I put a 150 amp circuit breaker in there.
Between the starter battery and the electronic sensor.
Correct.
Got it.
Yep. And so that way everything's kind of safe. And then the runs of wiring between all four of those devices are all, I think, between the starter battery and the circuit breaker is 6 inches run, 6 inch of wiring. Between the circuit breaker and the isolator is another 6 inches. Then from the isolator to the house battery, 10 inches maybe. So everything's pretty short. And theoretically, to be fully safe, you should have probably another circuit breaker on the other side of the isolator. But I made sure my wiring is in a place where it shouldn't have any issues, I guess. So I had to take both of my batteries and put them up under my rear tire, or where the spare tire would typically go underneath a 4Runner. In order to do that, I had to elongate all the wiring that typically is from the engine bay out to the batteries. And things associated with that are going to be your starter. Typically needs to be on its own wiring to have power from the battery to the starter. There's your main wiring harness goes into your main fuse box of your vehicle. And there's usually like a fusible link or something in that. That has the main connection from the battery to your fuse box. So that line had to be elongated. And then I had to, those are the main two, right?
What about the grounds?
The grounds. So whenever you're redoing that, the main thing is that I did was I made my chassis into a giant ground. And that's the best way to do it. It's the safest way. And then you just make some really good, solid, thick gauge connections from different points of your vehicle so that your entire chassis becomes a ground, and you can connect your different whatever electronic devices you want to your chassis for a common ground for everything. And so what I did was I took, I think, 4-gauge wiring from both batteries to the chassis. And then I took 4-gauge wiring from the chassis to the engine block. And I took a 4-gauge wiring from the engine block to, where else did I go?
The starter.
The starter.
And the alternator?
I think it was the alternator. It was the alternator ground. So yeah, it was, I mean, a lot of alternators will also ground through their brackets as well. So by just making sure that you have really solid, thick gauge grounds between the main components, so your battery, chassis, engine block, and then making sure if you do want to use your body as a ground as well, you can do that with aluminum and steel. You just have to make sure that your body is now very well grounded, because sometimes body mounts don't fully ground your body to your chassis.
Sure. If they're rubber.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So there's and the big thing is just remember, like we said, you can run low amperage power on thick gauge wiring. There's nothing that's going to hurt or damage by doing that. So just play it safe and make all your common grounds super thick wiring so you don't have any issues. It would be my recommendation. So I beefed up and made really good, solid grounds, common grounds to my entire chassis. So my entire chassis and body of the 4Runner are very well grounded in a common ground, so I can connect anything to it that I want.
Cool. So going back to your system, you ran these really long leads from the engine to the battery.
Yep.
Which battery?
The starter battery. So I have my starter battery running my starter, the main engine harness, so the one that the ECU needs that kind of connects everything, and my winch.
Okay.
And the winch was fun wiring, and we talked a little bit about that on previous episodes, because winches, if you look at the power draw of a winch under full load, you can pull 400 amps fairly easily with a winch.
Oh, right. So you're running 12 feet of cable.
I think I ran 18 feet for the winch, ground and a power all the way back to the starter battery. And so the problem with that becomes a lot of people say use a circuit breaker for a winch, but your winch can pull upwards of 400 amps. A circuit breaker, I'm sure there are 400 amp circuit breakers, but A, they're really expensive, and B, I think a short in a wiring would pull less than 400 amps.
You're right.
So even if you do get a short in the wiring, a circuit breaker is not going to do anything, a 400 amp circuit breaker.
No.
And if you have a 100 to 150 amp circuit breaker, which would do something if a short happens,
you might not be able to use your winch.
You're not going to be able to use your winch when you really need it to under full load. So how do you do that, deal with that? And what I did, which is a great idea, I forget who told me, it was one of the listeners, but Warren has a 350 amp relay. Essentially, it's a solenoid, which is the same thing as a relay. It's just a big relay, right? And so what I did was I ran all the power from the winch to that solenoid, and then I ran a 1 foot section of like 0.2 gauge wiring, super thick stuff, from the solenoid to my battery, to my starter battery. And then I ran the control circuit for the relay, the solenoid, back into the cab. So there is no power going to the winch, from the solenoid to the winch, unless I flip the switch in the cab. And that helps keep everything safe, right? So I do have to worry a little bit about that 1 foot section going from the starter battery to the solenoid. But you just make sure that you insulate that really well, so it's not going to get damaged on anything. It's not going to rub on anything. And that you tie it down or make sure that it's not going to move at all. So I have mine actually suspended. So I wrapped it in heat shrink, electrical tape, and then corrugated plastic pipe, whatever that is. And then I suspended it between the starter battery and the solenoid. So it's suspended in midair, 10 to 12, maybe 12 inches of wiring, 10 inches, I think. So it's not going to rub on anything. It's not moving anywhere. It's not going to vibrate on anything. It's just there in air. And if anything does come in contact with it, it's got to go through the corrugated plastic pipe, the electrical tape, and the heat shrink.
Wow. Okay.
Before it gets into the wiring. So that was the main, kind of the big trick. And my big worry about running 0.2 gauge wiring, and which, by the way, do not go to a Napa or AutoZone or anything and buy 0.2 gauge wiring.
No.
Buy 25-foot jumper cables.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And then just cut the alligator clips off of the jumper cables. And you've got 1 gauge to 0.2 gauge wiring for $50, something like that. If you went and bought it by itself, you'd be looking at $100 to $120.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was a fun trick I figured out doing that whole project. So then from there, it's really just comes down to where are you setting up your batteries, and how do you route all your wiring in a safe way, and then making sure that all your wiring is protected so that you don't have it rub on stuff, so that it is secured properly, so that you don't get a short. And then making sure that everything is fused so that if a short does happen, it shuts off those electrical circuits.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So why did you choose to put your batteries in the back?
Because I wanted to use my engine space for other stuff. That was my main thing. I've got my twin ARB in the engine space. I've got a Premier welder in the engine space. Let's see. I have the stock airbox, which I didn't really want to mess around with. Having a quote unquote aftermarket cold air intake is not really a cold air intake at all.
No.
So it's like there's no point. The only reason to put an aftermarket intake on your engine is if you want to save space or use the airbox space for something else. But my engine bay is just getting packed with other stuff. So I also have, my power steering reservoir aftermarket in there. I've got my relay and fuse box for my switch panel is in there. So there's just a bunch of stuff in there already that I was like, I'd rather have the batteries right next to each other so that I can keep the run of wiring between them as short as possible.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that was to take them both out of the engine bay and put them somewhere else.
Got it.
So up underneath the rear of the vehicle was kind of the best space. And the cool thing about AGM batteries is they don't care which direction you mount them in. So you can mount them upside down and still have relatively easy access to the battery posts and all the wiring. So I have all the wires labeled as well as to where they go, because I've got 16 to 20 feet of wiring on every single wire that goes back there.
Yeah.
So being able to have a label on it to know which wire each thing is for, which component each wire is for, helps a lot too.
How'd you label them?
Just blue tape.
Okay.
It looks super tacky. If you ever look up under my vehicle, it's super tacky the way it's all done, but it's very easy to trace wiring that way.
I was wondering, because if you did one of those like label makers that puts heat onto the label and changes it, I'm like, if you're sticking that onto your wire and that wire gets hot,
yep,
then you have a black label.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thermal labels are not good.
Yeah,
typically under vehicles. So,
all right. I have another question, but is there anything else that this is kind of fade us out in a way? So is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Or tell the listeners about how to set these things up?
Just be safe with it. Be very careful, because as you're dealing with dual battery setups, there's a lot more power involved than just a single battery. And there's a lot more potential for high discharges.
Yeah. How do you turn the batteries off so you don't get shocked?
There's a little switch on every single battery. It's great. No, yeah, just be careful when you're dealing with these.
Rubber gloves?
Rubber gloves works great. You're only dealing with 12 volt systems typically. So the chance to get shocked is minimal, and it's not going to hurt that much with a 12 volt system.
So people put 9 volts up to their tongues. Yeah, exactly.
It's when you start putting batteries in series that you start bumping up voltages.
Right.
So, running a 24 volt system, now you might start getting a little concerned about amperages and discharging and shocking you. But yeah, there's electric vehicles nowadays are running on 480 volt systems.
Dang.
So it's like when you start getting into those can output a shit ton of wattage. 1 amperage is 480 watts. It's 500 watts with 1 amp.
Wow.
So, you start looking at, 10 amps of something, you're at 500 or 5,000 watts all of a sudden.
Jeez.
So, there's a big difference in once you start bumping up voltages, and you can get shocked pretty good when you're bumping those up. So just be safe with it. Always take caution around electricity. it's not that difficult to understand. Once you understand how electricity works, you can do some really freaking cool stuff with it. But you need to treat it with respect. So
got it. Okay.
That's kind of the last things I would go with.
Cool. So my last question is, would you do this again or would you do something differently?
Depends on the vehicle. If I'm building an overlanding vehicle, I would do it very similarly to what I just did.
Oh yeah.
I would probably change the batteries. So I would probably run lithiums, and I would keep a really small, like a 10 amp hour lithium battery, maybe a 20 amp hour lithium battery as the starter, and then run a 50 to 100 amp hour battery as the house battery. And that way with lithium, that 20 amp hour starter battery, as long as you shouldn't be pulling that much power off of it ever. And with lithium, you can use that amperage down to really low voltages, and it's usually just fine. So you can, that's the way I would do it with an overlanding setup.
Okay.
For a rock crawler, I think when I redo Kermit's suspension, I'm just going to do away with the dual battery setup and run 100 amp hour lithium battery.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm going to be using my vehicle every single day. When I take Kermit out, I don't go and just camp in Kermit and let him sit for a weekend while I do on foot stuff. The whole point of going in Kermit is to go and play in Kermit. And so I'll be using him every single day. I don't think I can wear out a 100 amp hour lithium battery overnight. Unless I'm just doing something completely stupid and totally mess up and forget something, especially if I'm using the Jackery to run the fridge and other stuff like that. So, but for an overland setup, maybe I'll be running lights and camp lights for multiple days at a time. Maybe I'll be running and setting up the fridge to an overland setup, because the whole point is to go to a location and sit there for one night and then drive somewhere else, or sit there for multiple nights and have everything built off of the vehicle and, go do hiking kind of thing. So, for an overlanding style setup, I would definitely still do dual batteries. I would just do lithium ions and make my starter battery a small one that I don't really have too much to worry about, and then make my house battery the big one that is going to run pretty much everything.
Got it.
So
yeah, that was sort of what I was alluding to. I think there's also other options for just running bigger lead acid or AGM style batteries and
Absolutely.
not having to run duals if you're not using it that much, right? If you're not that dependent on, having a fridge and having lights and having all these other accessories built in, running your comms all day when things are parked, you can get away with just having, you can get away with having your normal battery, and you can get away even easier if you just have a bigger battery. There's also cutoff switches, right? If something gets to some point of amperage or wattage or voltage,
yep.
There it is. I'll run through the whole thing. If it, your battery ends up getting down to, 12 volts, it'll turn off everything and you won't be able to run anything until you start that vehicle back up.
True. That's another good way of putting it. There's definitely low voltage disconnects. They're LVDs. Blue Sea Systems sells awesome LVDs. There's a bunch of really good LVDs in the ham radio world as well for mobile electronics. But you could essentially just set up a fuse block that you connect all of your house, quote unquote, your house stuff to this fuse block.
Yeah.
And then have the power to the fuse block controlled by an LVD. Absolutely. You could do that as well. That would work great.
Yeah. And then you're fine to run anything and everything until you get down to that power, and then it turns off, and then you can't run anything.
Exactly.
Until you start your vehicle and bring that charge back up.
Yeah. So that's kind of the downside to LVDs.
Sure.
Is once you reach that voltage disconnect, you're done.
You're done.
But you have to, just restarting the vehicle and charging it.
Yeah. And your Ford has a remote start and it'll run for 10 minutes ish.
Yep.
If nobody gets in it or does anything, it turns itself off.
Yep.
And I forgot, I was talking to somebody else at Overland Expo West, and they said that their it was one of the guys from Relentless.
Yeah.
He said that his fourth or fifth gen 4Runner, he put a system in it where the car will automatically start when it gets when the LVD hits.
Oh, interesting.
The car will start and bring it up to a certain point, and then it'll turn itself off.
See, there's so many cool things you can do with electronics. Like,
yeah, because he has his fridge in his car and it's permanently on.
Yeah.
Right. So, there's. I think nowadays there's ways to get around dual batteries that you don't necessarily have to have dual batteries, you know, because there's so many options now that it's kind of an interesting game to play of like, do I really need it? I know it's an avenue and a lot of people kind of do it, but is it the best avenue?
Yep.
What other avenues are there?
Yep.
You know, how dependent am I going to, how long am I sitting in one spot and how dependent am I going to be on a battery?
Yeah. The Australian market has some phenomenal, really cool options on power management systems and battery management systems, because they build, you know, utes with these camper shells in the bed instead of a bed. And there's like full on power control panels and stations, almost like the circuit board in your house, for these vehicles. And they've got some pretty freaking bitchin' power management systems that they've figured out down there.
Right. I agree. I'm not sure you used utes in the proper, the correct way, but I'm sure Charles Locke will tell us. But utes are utility vehicles.
Okay. I mean,
so I don't know if that falls into that category, like where it goes, but I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, like a Ranchero is a ute.
Like a
Ford El Camino would be a ute.
Okay. So like,
I'm not sure if
a Hilux wouldn't be.
I don't know if a Hilux, I think a Hilux is a truck. I don't know if it's considered a ute. Charles, let us know.
Yeah. I'm curious now. Okay. I always thought that just a ute was synonymous with, utility
bed
vehicle, but like, I don't know. A truck to me is a utility vehicle. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Because whenever they have these really cool cars that are like a small Ranchero, sort of like a Subaru Brat.
Interesting,
right? And those are considered their utes. And so I don't think and I'm not sure, but I don't think a truck like a Hilux is a ute.
Interesting. All right, we'll have to hear from our Australian buddies on that one.
Yeah, Mighty Car Mods, Marty and Moog, please let us know.
Yeah, right. Cool. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got. I mean, just be safe with it. There's a ton of options out there, so I didn't want to get into any brands about anything like that because there's just a lot of options there. So, you know, if you want to know the isolator I used and the circuit breaker I used for my setup, get in contact with me. I'll let you know. But it's definitely not the only option out there.
Okay.
So there's tons of different options for isolators that do lots of different features, have different features associated with them. So yeah, just do some research, look into it. A lot of stuff is listed out on Google under dual battery setups. If you Google dual battery setups, there's a lot of information out there. So yeah, do some research. So don't take my word for everything.
I would say probably one of the last words.
Yeah. Right. So cool. If anybody did want to write in, where would they do that? How do they get in contact with us? Yeah,
you can email us at Jimmy or Tyler at SnailTrail4x4.com. That's 4x4. You can find me over at SnailTrail4x4 on Instagram. Tyler's over at 4x4 Toyota Tyler. Mm-hmm. You can find a lot of information about Morphlate and Snail Armor on our Instagrams as well. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that we have a bunch of shirts and Gear Wrench tools for sale on the SnailTrail4x4 website.
Cool. Yep. Definitely go check those out. We're talking as well about just putting up the trail kits without any bags for the time being, just because it seems like we're having trouble sourcing some bags. Yeah. Well, we want good bags and we want the right bags. And as awesome as the DeltaVS bag was, it didn't quite fit our needs. Mm-hmm. And our needs seem to be pickier than what we had planned. So we're considering selling the toolkits just bagless for right now. And if you're interested in that, contact us and we'll see if we can we'll really push and make this process happen quicker. Yeah, exactly. So get in contact with us. Let us know if you're interested and we'll make that happen. And with that, Jimmy, do you have any final words for everybody out there?
I would just get a standalone separate lithium battery and use it, not do a dual battery.
And with that, my friends, keep crawling.
I got one for you.
More jokes?
More jokes.
Halloween themed?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
My favorite holiday. What is it like to be kissed by a vampire?
Blood curdling?
It's a pain in the neck.
Oh. Got it.